So I'm going to start with an impolite question. Do you discriminate on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation? I mean, if you were the identical TED Talk, but coming from a white guy, would you like it better? Of course not. Why would you do that? We all remember the dream. We remember what Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, right? He said we're supposed to judge people by the content of character, not the color of skin. You judge people only on the merits and nothing else. We're colorblind. But are you so sure? So it turns out actually some people actually are literally colorblind, so they can't see that tile A is much darker than tile B, but most of us actually can see that. But it's actually an illusion. Just like a smartphone camera does autofocus and autocorrect, it turns out our brains do the same thing constantly. And when we do so, we usually get things right, but sometimes the shadows and the compensation for actual contrast effects gets things wrong. It's this understanding that maybe our brains are like our powerful smartphone cameras that can actually tell us a lot about how things actually work. So think about it. The real world confronts you at a brutal pace in real time. You can't but engage in automatic processing. So when I came out on the stage, what did your brains do? You autofocused on my face, you did some face recognition, and you immediately hashtagged me with multiple categories: male, middle-aged, professional, Asian. And then you stored that data in a mental cloud that you keep up here with all the other things that you have stored and hashtagged as Asian over the course of your entire lives. Now, social psychologists would describe that mental cloud in terms of attitudes and stereotypes. Attitudes are like gut feelings, emotional valences of positive versus negative, like versus dislike, hot versus not, thumbs up versus thumbs down. By contrast, stereotypes are like traits that you associate with the category. So you already know I'm a professional, I'm a law professor. Once you put me into the category of Asian, you might be thinking, more likely than not that he got a perfect score on his math SAT. I'm Asian. More likely than not that I have a second-degree black belt in some ancient East Asian martial art. More likely than not that I was raised by a tiger mom who forced me to practice, not cello, but violin 6 hours a day, such that I performed at Carnegie Hall at the age of 16. 2 out of those 3 are actually true. Decades of research have told us that actually these attitudes and these stereotypes influence how you see me and how you behave. So if I want to know whether you discriminate, I actually have to get access to that mental cloud. I have to know what the junk is inside your head. Now, one way to do that is for me to just sidle up to you and ask, like, on average, sir, are African Americans more violent and criminal than white folks? On average, ma'am, do you think that women just aren't as good as men in engineering and science, whether they be 12-year-olds or 40-year-olds? On average, do you think Asians are really good at technically copying things but lack the creativity that we really so desperately desire in a context such as this? When I ask these further impolite questions, I run into 2 veils. First, even if you have attitudes and stereotypes that you're aware of, you're not going to tell me what you really think, especially when the cameras are rolling. Like, how many beers must you have drunk before noon before you actually tell me what you think? More disturbing is that you might have implicit biases, mental associations that you're not even aware of, these filters that come from culture day in and day out. And if you're not even aware of them, you're not able to self-report even to yourselves, much less others. And there's decades again of social psychological research that says, in a weird way, our brains are such ridiculously complex machines that we can't just introspect and figure out what's really going on. As Timothy Wilton says, we are strangers to ourselves. So how then do we measure these implicit biases that we might not even be aware of? Do we put you under hypnosis? Do we put you under an fMRI and take brain scans? What about something simpler, like playing a video game? In order to understand, I need you to participate. The rules are very, very easy. All you have to do is run down columns 1, 2, and 3, and as quickly as possible, ignore the letters, shout out the colors. So for column number 1, you would say green, red, purple, green. I need all of you to participate. Ready, set, go. Green, red, purple, green. It's a TED audience. I assumed it would be a little bit better. Okay, second time, here we go. Ignore the letters, focus only on the colors. Ready, set, go.
Green, red,
Oh yeah, you're screaming. So third time should be the charm. Now I want you to focus only on the colors. Be blind to the letters as if Martin Luther King Jr. implored you to do it. Ready, set, go. All right, all right. It's like being stuck in molasses in a winter January, right? So now you get it. Now you see it. The whole point is that any two concepts that are tightly associated in our brains, we can actually pair together very quickly. So when you see the word RED and the color red, we can sort them very quickly together. By contrast, when you see the word RED and the color green, we hesitate. It's like our CPUs are thrashing about trying to get the right answer. We're not stupid. We got admitted as participants in the TED Talk. Like we should be doing this faster, but it takes a little bit longer. But that's the insight, right? That you could use the speed of sorting as a signal for how tight things are mentally associated in this cloud that we don't have access to. That is the underlying logic of the implicit association test invented by Tony Greenwald. And you sit in front of a computer and play essentially a video game. You're flashed, for example, on the standard black-white attitudinal IAT, pictures of white folks, white men, hit a key with your left hand. If you see a picture of a black man, hit a key with your right hand. We could do that. That's actually easy. When you see sometimes good words like beauty and joy, hit a key with your left hand. By contrast, when you see words like filth and sick, bad words, hit a key with your right hand. We can follow these instructions. Notice the actual arrangement. White faces and good words are on the same response key. Black faces and bad words are on the same response key. And we fly through that test. But because psychologists are devious people, sometimes randomized and counterbalance, you get runs like this, where you get white faces and bad words on the same hand, and black faces and good words on the same hand. And then we hesitate, we stutter, we make a few more errors, we go a little bit more slowly. It's that delta in time that by definition is deemed to be a measure of your bias that you could measure, and it might be only 300 milliseconds. It might only be 200 milliseconds. But that's the test that was created. Now, if this test is just nonsense, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, whether you grew up playing Nintendo versus Xbox, what would you see if you gave this test to a lot of people? Well, you would see random noise, like a coin flip, right? Half the people would sort good words with white faces faster, other time faster with black faces. It would just be 50-50. So think about what data has been collected. So you actually have this amazing site, Project Implicit, run by Brian Nozick, Majrin Banaji, and Tony Greenwald, both professors Banaji and Greenwald I've had the great pleasure of co-authoring with. They've collected millions of IAT scores, and here's what we see. It's not 50-50. 80% of us associate good words faster with pictures of young people versus old people. 68% white over black, 68% straight over gay, 69% thin over fat, 76% abled over disabled, and 72% of us are faster to sort pictures of weapons with black male faces versus white male faces. It's not random. Moreover, these implicit biases seem to be strong. You could measure people's explicit biases. You go up there and you ask them survey questions, and they can answer anonymously. When they do, they show some preference in the ways that you would predict of young over old, white over black, and so on. But when you look at the implicit biases, actually expressed in the same standard statistical units, you see implicit biases as being stronger. It's as if explicitly we can hear the wisdom of Martin Luther King, but implicitly, not so much. We want to be colorblind, but maybe Nietzsche was right. There is no immaculate perception. But do milliseconds really matter, as my friend Dolly Chuk has asked? Like, I've shown you that there's all this evidence about time, 300 milliseconds, but we don't really care about time, we care about behavior. Does behavior change as a function of this? This is precisely what we wanted to ask and answer. So for example, if you had to put on headphones and listen to a lawyer's cross-examination, would you judge the lawyer differently as a function of whether you thought the lawyer was white versus Asian? Of course not. We're the model minority, right? And we all remember the dream, but that's what we wanted to ask and answer. So my colleagues, Nilanjana Dasgupta, Kumar Yogiswaran, as well as Gary Blasey, actually brought in a lot of people outside of UCLA, mostly white. We, of course, measure their explicit bias. So we give them survey questions and ask them, on average, right, how eloquent do you think the white American litigator is? Eloquent, assertive, persuasive. We ask the exact same questions about Asian American litigators. Guess what the results are? Surprise, surprise, no average difference. We all remember the dream. But we don't want to stop there. We also want to measure their implicit biases. And it turns out, even though there's no average difference in explicit survey results, there is a difference in speed. We're faster to sort white faces with litigator words than Asian faces with litigator words. So we see some difference. Of course, all that we really care about is actual behavior. They heard these cross-examinations. They were tricked into thinking that one was done by an Asian person, one was done by a white person. The way we tricked them was just to flash a 5-second picture of the Asian attorney or the white attorney and changing the last name on the transcript that they read along with. The results were really interesting. Some good news and bad news. So the good news is that the implicit bias, this kind of little reaction time, didn't seem to have an impact on how they evaluated the Asian attorney. But when it came to the white attorney, it did have an impact. The higher the bias, the higher the evaluations. So to give you some concrete sense, imagine someone like Philip who has 0 implicit bias. This is what he would have given the white attorney as a score on a 7-point scale on competence, likability, hireability. But imagine someone else like Matthew, who's in the 93rd percentile of bias. He would have given these scores much higher on a 7-point scale. Even if Matthew has no explicit bias, his implicit bias, as measured by this silly little video game, implicitly moved him. He was moved by what I call the rightness of whiteness. There's an impact. Our study emphasizes and gives more evidence to the belief that these implicit biases actually alter our behavior. And scientists have said and found that implicit biases could influence the way that we get called back for resumes, how awkward my body language is to you, whether we hire men over women in the laboratory, whether we cut minority student budgets or not, how doctors actually recommend treatments for heart attacks, the speed of shooting blacks versus whites in a video simulation, and even cops' use of force out in the field as correlated with an implicit stereotype of African Americans and of all things apes. This forces us, the mind sciences forces us to rethink. We thought we were blessed with immaculate perception, but it turns out we're infected with implicit bias. We thought the problem was explicit racism only in the past, but it turns out there's subtle discrimination going on right now. We thought it was enough to teach our kids don't be a hater without actually warning them about parochially loving only themselves. We thought it's not my fault, when the truth is we're the problem. What to do? Unfortunately, my time is up, so you're going to have to wait for my next TED Talk. All I can say is the following. There's great, interesting scientific evidence that if you're exposed to countertypical exemplars, your biases actually decrease, at least temporarily. So no matter what your Asian baggage might have been in your head, it might be that by the course of this talk, I changed them along the way. More important is to recognize that there is no immaculate perception, and that recognition is the next critical step on our long climb up the mountaintop to the promised land toward his dream. Thank you.